Well, okay, let's kick off. So normally I'd be in the studio and welcoming you, but you, Giovanni, have welcomed me. So why don't you
Welcome
tell
to New
us,
York.
thank you, as you can tell by the outside ambience where someone's rebuilding something, you know it's a field recording then. So look, I am in the rather lovely offices of Rothy's, and for those who maybe haven't been to one of their stores or aren't familiar with them, let's kick off with an intro. So, Giovanni, you invited me here. Tell everyone who you are and your role, and then we'll talk about Rothy's.
Sure. So my role at Rothy's is developing the offline network. So the official title is Global Retail Development, but it involves, anything that has to do with not online. Rothy's and my background is in building premium global luxury brands. I worked both in Europe and the US. With Prada, I set up, built Aesop in North America when we first launched before we sold it to Natura. I worked for LVMH and for a bunch of other brands in wholesale, retail, and e-com. Rothy's was started in San Francisco by two men, Roth and Steven, hence Rothy's. So it was Steven goes by Rothy and Roth is Roth, so Roth and Rothy is Rothy's. Also, I suspect it was one of the few domains that hadn't been taken, considering that it's online only, and it was started by these two men out in San Francisco. It was 6 years in the making, so it took a long time to develop the product, which has 70 or 80 patents at this point. And it's a very interesting journey because they bought a factory in Maine, which in a town which in the 50s was the world's largest producer of shoes. Little unknown, not well-known fact. So they bought the factory and they had to sell it because what happened was that they just couldn't develop the product. So they could develop samples, but the know-how and the supply chain is just not here. So it's not everyone thinks it's a matter of cost, but it wasn't a matter of cost. It was a matter of the supply chain is not here, the know-how is not here. They could get some samples, but they couldn't get it to scale. And they couldn't get it to scale, the reason being that what's revolutionary about the shoes is essentially the kind of like aha moment was that shoes have been made the same way for hundreds of years, which is really taking a flat piece of leather or fabric or whatever it is and cutting it into pieces and sewing it together. And it's complex because it's a lot of pieces. There's a lot of waste. It's about 30% of what are called scraps is essentially all the you're taking a square or a rectangle or whatever, a cowhide, and you're cutting all the pieces, and then the rest gets essentially thrown out, or Hermes is doing the petit, whatever they call it, the little sculptures, but essentially they're also admitting that it's thrown out. So the revolutionary idea was really to take a knitting machine and do what we call 3D knitting, which is really a knit top on a flat bottom, and that essentially has zero waste because just like any knitwear, it's knit to shape.
It's a very distinctive weave. So when you see the shoes, you can tell the weave straight away. It's not, for example, like an Adidas or a Flyknit at all, but it's got a very distinctive texture as well.
Yeah, and the texture is given by the fact that they need to hold shape. So the what's unique about this product in particular and why they couldn't get it to scale initially was that we have half sizes, and the variance in a half size or in a size, I guess, because it's small, medium, large for a sweater, is about 1 or 2 centimeters. And in shoes, half a size is millimeters. And so you can't have a production run where you have a variance that's that big. It really needs to be much smaller to have the consistency. And the other thing that's really unique about our product, aside from being made out of recycled plastic bottles, which now it's a bit of a commodity, but it's that everything that's Rothy's is machine washable. So you can put it in the machine, in washing machine, cold obviously, air dry, and they come out as new essentially. And so if you have a material that's too stretchy or too giving, that's gonna as you wear it, it's going to become loose, and then it kind of, like we started with a shoe that's called the Point, which is essentially a ballerina flat with a point toe. And it doesn't have shoestrings or anything, so if it gets loose, then
it's not going to work.
It's not going to work.
Yeah. So this is the only downside of podcasts. So it's great to be in people's ears, but we can't show them a picture. So Dear listener, I am going to link to the website and the pictures because just in case you're thinking that this is some form of Christmas Santa sock with a sole on,
No.
the feel of them is very structured,
Yes.
and so they've got a very distinctive feel and a bend, and the soles are very interesting as well. So we are going to put up some pictures so you can see those too. So we've learnt already about the waist with leather that's worked around by doing the direct knitting. We've then understood about washing and the very precise sizing. So again, very different. But looking through the store, they're also very fashionable styles as well. So I can understand that it's quite straightforward to do a ballet pump. But, you know, we're looking at brogues, very structured shoes. So the knitting itself seems like too small a word for quite an extraordinary technical activity.
Yes, I think and sorry, just to finish the story of the two founders, what ended up happening, just to close the loop, and which has really become a distinctive advantage for us, is that they ended up having to build our own factory, and that factory is actually in China, not because, again, of cost, but really because of know-how. And so we own, as the founder, as Rothy always says, we make every shoe we sell, and we sell every shoe we make. So we're 100% integrated, which then, speaking back to the sustainability aspect, it really helps us to be able to cut down on waste and on, waste meaning overproduction, which is one big thing, but also, the factory is the first factory in China that's fully certified, not just platinum LED certified, but also zero waste. So we essentially don't consume any outside energy. It's completely recycled, and we recycled everything. And we're working toward circularity, which again, we can do because we make the shoes and we know the 100% of the journey of the shoes. Back to your question, and yes, I would invite, one thing that people always think when we say made out of recycled plastic bottles, they think structured and rigid. And in fact, most people are surprised by how soft the fabric is. The company we started commercializing in 2018, and it was really a huge success from the get-go. But we started with 3 silhouettes, which was the point, the loafer, and the sneaker. And the idea was always from the beginning to have, as the name indicates, the idea of like a distillation of like a point or a loafer, and so it's distilled down to like very clean lines with the blue halo at the back, but it's a very clean sort of element. And then as that has, and as the brand has evolved, and as people have started, particularly in the US, where we're still doing 98% of the business, we've started to layer in. And the other thing is, it was very California in the sense that it's it's a shoe that it works in a it's kind of like in a seasonless climate, which is 70,
which is not New York,
which is not New York, or which is not a lot of the world. And so having winter and summer products, open toes, and now we began with platform, because the other thing that we should say for those who don't know the brand is that all the shoes that we started with were flats. And so one element is that there's a lot of, and we started with women, now we have men's, and we have kids, and we have bags, but the original business was women's shoes. And a lot of women don't wear flats for a wealth of different reasons. So this year was really the first year where we had platform shoes. And this winter we added a little bit of a heel, which is really the first evolution. And then, we launched some things that were on trend just because, the trend has caught up with us, like the Mary Jane, which has been huge, and it's everywhere from, designers to somewhere else. But also we launched the clog, which was, it's very winter, very cozy, open back. And that was also like a huge success, and it continues to be a huge success. So as the brand evolves, we're layering in, but the idea of the brand from the get-go, as Roth sort of envisioned it, was really that the technology is a platform, but we're not tied to just using recycled PET. There's a lot of new materials that we're using, for instance, in the soles, which are not made out of recycled PET,
Right.
but like other, rubber or other
But they are
sort of
also
algae.
recyclable, aren't they?
They're both recyclable and green, whatever that means today. But it's a lot of using whether the so-called vegan leather, which is some sort of fungi or like other vegetable versions of it, which then can be recycled versus other things that are harder to recycle. And some things like the upper then can be recycled into plastic pellets and spun into yarn, and other things get reused for floor basing or for other things, not for shoes, but they can be recycled. I think what is still a bit of a challenge is the technology is catching up, but we're still not quite there in terms of like the amount of energy and manpower that's needed to be able to like take the shoes back, sort of break them down and reuse. So it's the cost is definitely higher, but it's not just the cost, it's also like a net energy and the shipping and all those elements. So
But you do take the shoes back. I think I read on your website.
We have a pilot program
store.
where we started taking them back, and you get some sort of
And has that been well received?
Yes, it's been very well received. I think one thing that's it's good about our product, but for someone like me who's trying to sell more of it, is that they do last forever and they're washable. And so it really, there's and 6 years on, so we don't know. I mean, they could last how long they could last, but it's more like people's willingness to like give them up for something else and something new than really a need for recycling. But it's something that we're playing with and experimenting just because, again, we have those elements. The sustainability aspect for us is more around, as I said, scraps and zero waste, the packaging where we don't use 2 or 3 boxes like a lot of people do. There, you can reuse the same box. And then really inventory where we control, because we control the factory, we don't have to commit to quantities a year and a half in advance or to like bits and parts. We dye the yarn ourselves, and so if there's a new color or a color that's in season or that's in trend or that's selling, then we can quickly get back into it, which is a huge advantage relative to over ordering and then having to somehow.
So let's just skip over an ocean or to the factory.
Yes.
So it's been a long time trend of increased capability and increased sustainability in factories in China, but it's quite a jump to move everything there. So just tell me what it was that made you decide to invest in this factory, not just money, but also the time, the skills, the development, knowing everybody, rather than anywhere else in the world.
The reality is that that's the only place where they could. So it wasn't even an investment in the factory. It was really there's no one, they went around the world, really looked at all different options from Puerto Rico to Maine to, whatever, and they couldn't find anyone to produce what they wanted at scale. And so, I think as many entrepreneurs can, I've never started my own company, but as many entrepreneurs have said, they were really close to like just quitting. It's just the time and money that they had invested that really kept them going, to essentially say, okay, no one's able to do it. We have to essentially buy a knitting machine, convert it, and do it ourselves.
Right.
And prove we can do it. And so it wasn't really that they didn't want to go and have it produced somewhere, is that they couldn't find anywhere to produce. And so the only solution was, let's build it ourselves. And the place to do it where there was enough supply chain know-how and all the elements coming together in one place was really in China. And so it would, it's not an ideal place, and from our perspective, because there's high tariffs on, for instance, nylon plastic. So if you look at it just purely from a tax and financial perspective, it's not the ideal place. It's also, PR and everything, but the reality is like that's where they could get it done.
So let's jump now back to the States. The brand took off. It gained traction as a D2C brand.
Yes.
So talk to me about the move then into retail, because the stores are great.
Thank you.
But we've seen a lot of these digital native brands as they go direct to consumer, burn through a lot of money, retrench, work out retail, come back. And so while we wish all of them well, you seem to have had from an external perspective, a much smoother track. So just tell me, what made you decide there was a time to go into physical stores and how that sits alongside the e-com?
So there's two things. One thing that I would like to say is that we didn't burn through a lot of money. The two founders took very little money and after the brand launched, and they were very adamant about building a long-term brand and building it profitably. So it wasn't about spending money to acquire customers at a loss. The other thing that I like to caveat is that the brand was launched, I want to say they launched at the farmers market in San Francisco with just a batch, and it was a huge success, and then launched online early 18.
Yeah.
And this was at a time where Instagram was still coming of age. So the competition to launch brands online, it wasn't as steep as it is now. It was kind of like the new thing and the novelty. And so it was still possible to launch something new online and DTC as it's become known ever since. But it's been quite a journey and an evolution. And I think some brands have been burned, as you said, because they effectively paid to acquire customers, which fortunately was never our case. It was really a steady growth. And the retail really came initially as an experiment. We opened a small, tiny store in Pacific Heights in San Francisco. And it was very clear from the get-go that it was a success. I mean, we had a line out the door. It was wildly profitable. People were excited. And I think there were a lot of key learnings, but one obvious key learning, which I don't think you need to open a store to figure out, is that people want to try on shoes. And so that helps to touch it, feel it, put it on. And there's this, what we call, I don't know how censored you are, but we call it holy shit moment, where it's like people put it on and it's like, oh my God, it's so comfortable because it feels like a sock because there's no stitches. And so that you can only do in store. I mean, you can do all the videos that you want online, but seeing the color, the texture, the feel, you can't do it. And then I think there's an element, there's a very high social element, particularly for us. There's this group of self-anointed Rothy's addicts who are like really collectors and really sort of rabid advocates for the brand, and who love, who have this social aspect, which comes together in a store. We have someone who bakes like cookies in the shape of our shoes, and every time we open a store, so it's very and that engagement you can't buy. I mean, it's natural. I mean, I'm sure there's ways to cook it, but we didn't, and it's natural. It's worked out very well for the brand, and so from there it was sort of like, okay, it makes a lot of sense. Let's. We should open more stores. We have the data of where our customers are from online. So that's where I came on board. And it's like, okay, what does the store look like? I mean, when we started, as I said, we had 3 SKUs, so it was very limited, and it made sense in a 300 square foot store. Yeah. Fast forward to today, you saw the flagship that we just opened on Flatiron and Fifth Avenue. We have bags, we have men's, we have kids. So
I love the bags.
We thank you. They're also washable. And so we need more space to display in a way that makes sense.
But the moment you walk in, and it's got that feeling of, in London terms, it's like a Bond Street, top quartile shoe store. So a nice range, 50, 60, feels like different colorways. It's a very nice experience, good number of staff. So it feels quite premium. And so for Europeans, it feels like it's at the right size. So you said that it was mainly US at the moment. Do you have stores outside of mainland US?
We do not. We have a pop-up at Liberties, which we opened in August. And that was our first physical presence outside of the United States. We have been shipping internationally for now. We were before COVID, and we restarted over a year ago now. UK and Canada, not surprisingly, and Australia are the biggest markets, and then most of the rest of Europe. We've had a presence in China because of the factory, and we've been selling on WeChat, but not a physical presence. And we are looking at expanding concessions and freestanding stores. London is going to be the first, not surprisingly, in all the places that you can imagine. And then I think, Europe and Asia probably
I mean,
26.
I think the fit with Liberty is a really nice one because of the textile history and
Yes.
heritage at Liberty. So I'm already imagining it. So that's very interesting. Now, our listener will have been enjoying herself so far, but is probably thinking, Giovanni's just got the nicest life. Everything's just fallen into place. It's all taken off online, it's moved swiftly to store, everyone's happy. So if we were just, balancing out the score sheet, any challenges you've had to overcome in this, what sounds like a lovely move and growth?
Yeah, look, I think, one, I think we hinted at the fact that obviously the online world has changed, and now I would argue and I would say that it's 100% pay for play. So it's driven by the three large names that everyone knows, and it's, you're just bidding for advertising, and there's a high correlation. What I would think it's the biggest challenge is really it's not just finding the locations, but making sure that the locations work. And what I mean by that is coming from an online-only culture where 100% of sales come from online. Retail is just very different, and wholesale, which we just launched, is also very different. And so it's really shifting that mindset internally in terms of the procedures and the elements of understanding that, small examples, but people don't love endless aisle, which was sold as the holy grail, and surprise, surprise, it's kind of like the trying on, right? If I come to the store, I don't want to wait 3 days to get my shoes. I want to walk out with the shoes, right? Unless I don't want to, carry them with me, and I ask you to ship them, but generally I want to walk out with them. So having, inventory in the store is important. Having a point of view in the store when you have the level of assortment that we have now, which is large, and which is because of, how we were born online, the famous drops that, all the streetwear names have invented. We call it something else, but essentially we were launching new things every 2 or 3 weeks because of, the limited amount of silhouettes and the limited amount of stock. And so the ability of changing things very, not necessarily quickly, but quickly enough relative to a so-called omnichannel brand, it's a lot easier, or reacting to whatever the consumer is reacting to, whether they're liking it, not liking it, pricing, you name it. It's much more nimble. When you start having stores, when you start having wholesale, you have to plan ahead. You can't change everything from, like you could on a website.
And so with the wholesale, one of the things that struck me, in fact, it always is really brought home when I'm in New York, is the quality of the sales associates. But when I was in your store earlier on, chatting to them about, is it really recyclable? Can you repair it? So the knowledge they had about the product, as well as the styles, as well as New York service levels, it's quite a heady mix. So when you start wholesaling to people, how do you then manage that they can carry your brand values? It's not just 4 styles, 4 colors in a corner somewhere.
It's challenging. In some cases, you try to have a concession where it's your staff, or it's, so-called co-op. In other cases, it's really training and making sure, the staff is trained. I mean, it's no secret that retail has a high turnover rate, and it's definitely one of the biggest challenges, I think, is, service and knowledge. And, we're just starting out, to be fair, with wholesale. This is the first year. It's really also trying to make it, not go everywhere, really have a limited distribution with limited partners, and making sure that it's, the right partnership, and not just being everywhere, which is obviously, it's a luxury that we have because we're still, relatively speaking, small and growing, and so we can make sure that we are, filling in the gaps that we have with retail, with wholesale, but not, opening hundreds of points of distributions overnight, which then I think becomes challenging to manage.
So as we're recording this, it's the time of pumpkins and spice. So let's jump past that into maybe 2025. What's your focus for next year? Where do you see your time and successes will go, hopefully hand in hand?
Yeah, look, for company-wide, I think we hinted at international, so like that's going to be a big focus for us in terms of launching physically, in London, expanding the international presence, and so it's a big focus of mine. Continuing to open retail stores, we only have 25 full-price retail stores and one outlet in the US. We think we could be between 50 and 75, so we're continuing to be disciplined about the locations that we go into and make sure that it's the right locations. I'll say back to the conversation that we were having before, we have been very disciplined in making sure that we go into the right locations and our stores are profitable. So back to, not taking money and burning and opening a bunch of stores.
These are words that are, warming the cockles of the hearts of all our listeners.
Right. Yeah. But so it's, that takes time because it's obviously, as anyone who's in retail knows, it's a trade-off between what's available and what you want and how quickly you want it. And so it's, you can't open 100 stores in A locations in a year, right? So that continues to be, and real estate right now is tight for all the reasons that we touched. Everyone went from DTC to omnichannel, and retail is hot again, and it's working certainly in the top locations and in the top centers.
And it's noticeable here walking around that a year or two ago there were a lot of empty stores.
Yes.
You're not seeing that now. The openings are enormous, the refits are enormous. So there is a definite sort of vibrancy about.
And people are back. I mean, both in retail shopping and hard goods, as well as in restaurant and F&B. I mean, you can it's palpable if you're in New York. The amount of people that are out shopping, and we've had great weather, so that always helps. But it's definitely the stores. There's a ton of new stores opening all the time, which keeps it exciting, and I think people are also excited. And so that's one big thing. And then on the product side, I think we'll continue to evolve. So as I said, there's new materials, there's new styles. I think we'll continue to expand men's and kids, which have been sort of neglected, and really build that up as well.
For kids, they are just perfect.
They're cute.
They are so
and they're
perfect.
washable, so it always helps for kids. And so continuing to build on that, I think will be the key focus for us for the next year, and really continuing to execute, which is, retail is working well for us. I mean, we're comping at high double digits at this point for the stores that are comping. And, I think a lot of the growth is going to come from offline for all the reasons that everyone knows, which is, acquiring I think there's a limit to how many customers you can profitably acquire online. I mean, you can acquire a lot of them by paying them, but then you can do anything by paying. If you pay people high enough, they'll buy your product.
It's the old adage,
buy quote unquote.
If you're selling $10 bills for $5 each,
right,
you'll get 100% sell-through.
Exactly, that's how it works, right? So that's part of the that's part of the evolution, and I think keeping to grow international where we have lower brand awareness will be important as well, and really continuing to make it truly into a global brand.
Great. Well, look, Giovanni, you've been very welcoming, and thank you for sharing a bit about Rothy. So, as I said, our listener will get some pictures, but for those who are outside the US, we look forward to welcoming you in London and hopefully beyond. Thank you again.
Yes, and go check out Liberties or rothys.com.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you.